headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Go live to Kiev in just a little bit, but your thoughts on the situation? The Russians have announced that actually they're going to start pulling back from the border today, which to my mind means they'll probably almost certainly invade tomorrow, and they're saying they're humiliating the West because they never intended to invade anyway. But whether they go in or not, it's already put petrol prices up to such an extent that the average family car now costs 80 quid to fill up with fuel. And they predict it might be £100 soon. So that conflict, whether it actually breaks into war or not, is already hitting us in the pocket.
Yes, exactly. I mean, there's the geopolitical picture and who knows what will happen. It's uncertain over there. And of course, you know, Boris Johnson scuttles over with his inarticulate views on this issue. I'm sure Putin is quaking in his boots about the words of Boris Johnson, but it is an uncertain situation. But for me, it's the point that you touched on. It's about the chain of events that hits people in the pocket from a crisis. You know, you've seen it over, for instance, supply chain issues with COVID. You're now seeing it with this. And your average person, quite often now through this winter, facing a choice between possibly feeding their family or putting fuel in their car or heating their house. There are consequences that come from these sort of situations. And yet we have governments who aren't really addressing those issues. They're posturing on a global stage. Yes, the situation in Ukraine is volatile and it's worrying, but it's also worrying for people seeing their prices going up. And yet we're not having governments taking action on that. And for me, that has to be the primary concern of a government. It's actually serving the people they're supposed to represent with actually hard action to do something about this problem, where it's a problem between families either feeding their kids or putting fuel in the car. And that is not a good situation.
And that's where we're at the moment. And the government is merely sort of sitting back and saying, oh, well, it's international financial forces. There's not much we can do about it, particularly in terms of energy prices. The gas prices are volatile. And that's why, to some extent, the bills are going sky high. We're talking about huge increases on energy bills. And all the time on our energy bills, James, there will be the 16% levy that we continue to have to pay to fund Boris's carbon net zero fantasy. Now, this is all very well. Middle class people are very worried about climate change. A lot of people who are cash strapped, have to worry about money, would prefer that we didn't worry too much about climate change right now, but we looked after the pound in their pocket, because literally we are going to drive those people beyond the poverty line. And Boris Johnson needs to do something about this. And if he doesn't take off his green levy to pay for all his green claptrap, then surely he must start fracking in order to provide this country with the cheap energy it needs, and that will be probably for 100 years.
This is the thing between sort of major, sort of almost highfalutin conversations about trying to change the world versus what is actually happening on the street, what's happening in people's houses. If you know, I'm an environmentalist. I hate some of the things that are going on with the planet, but if you want to have a discussion about that, look at, for instance, a lot of the, you know, in terms of wind turbines or solar panels are coming to the end of their 20-year cycle and they're getting dumped in landfills. How is that sustainable? Or masks, when there's over 3 billion of them swimming around our oceans right now. How is that sustainable? And the public, yes, they want, ideally, a cleaner, more healthy planet, but what they want is to be financially healthy as well. What they want is to put food on the table. What they want is financial security. What they want is a government who has a grown-up strategy that improves society generally, but also gives them an opportunity to flourish financially and have financial security and take care of their families. And at the moment, we have, like COP was a perfect example. Now, COP, you end up having leaders strutting in from around the world, quite often on private jets. Our Prime Minister took a private jet from Glasgow to, I think it was some sort of private members party.
Yeah, it was the Garrick Club. He had to get there to meet a bunch of his mates from the Telegraph, and he would have never made it by train. So, of course, in comes the private jet. Unbelievable.
Yeah, he did this recently. I think he went to, was it Blackpool or something like that?
Yeah, he did. He went up by a private jet. He loves his private jets, old Boris.
He does. He's quite often on a cycling as well. But, you know, if there's a choice between a private jet or getting some sort of other slightly more sustainable form of transport like a train, he tends to get the private jet. Yet he tells the world, in his words, to grow up. in terms of environmental sustainability. I mean, the contradictions and hypocrisy from our leaders on a number of different topics are there, in particular aspects around the environment. And it's not just Johnson. They're all doing it. But then the average person, again, same with Partygate, are looking at their behaviour and going, well, they're not doing it. Yet they're telling us to do the very things that we're supposed to be doing, and yet they're swanning around in private jets.
Yeah, look at what about the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss? She recently took a private jet all the way to Australia for her very important visit down under. The cost of her journey was £500,000. So not only was that very expensive for the taxpayer, it wasn't very good for the environment. As you quite rightly say, James, once again, this government talking the talk about climate change but not walking the walk. If they can't give us a lead and show that they're trying to save the world, save the planet, help the environment, then why should we? That's another reason Boris has to think twice about his green policies. But in the short term, of course we all care about the environment. Of course we all care about the future of the planet. But I'm afraid there are more urgent practicalities right here, right now. And millions of people are going to be driven to the poverty line over these soaring prices. And I'm afraid it is time for Boris to take that 16% green levy off people's energy bills right now.
Yeah, it's all about, I think, good government serves its people. And by serving its people, it's not just about integrity and avoiding being a bunch of hypocrites. It's also about having long-term policies as well. You know, we've got a lot of sort of so-called kind of marketing buzzwords flying around like Northern Powerhouse and sunlit uplands and the rest of it. But we haven't, for decades now, had a proper industrial manufacturing strategy that goes out beyond the southeast and into regions right across the country where it's providing sustainable employment opportunities, industry and manufacturing right across the country. So communities that are potentially hollowed out back in the deindustrialization era of the 80s, these communities have been forgotten about. And we hear politicians for decades and decades talking about, oh, we're going to sort out the north, industrial powerhouse, but they never actually do it. Words are cheap, but actions are more difficult. And what I want from a government is not come up with policies about, you know, green agendas that actually cost the average person more money. What I want is a government to put into place a long-term strategy that is sustainable. If we want to talk about environmental sustainability, it's sustainable in terms of industry that reboots all of these forgotten communities across the country. I think that is one of the foundations of a healthy and vibrant society that feels secure. It is an opportunity of industry to spread its wings right across the country, but that has to be driven by government to show us how that is done, working with business to make sure those opportunities are there, not just in the southeast.
And here's an idea, James. Let's resume fracking. If fracking was done properly and provided this nation with the cheap energy it so desperately needs, that energy, shale gas, could supply us with energy for possibly 100 years of cheap, really cheap energy, and we'd also be able to sell it abroad as well. And if we did resume fracking, it would create 75,000 jobs in the north. The failure to do that, the closing down of the fracking operation, is an absolute disgrace. And the government and politicians were just scared of those crusties demonstrating, saying there's going to be a massive San Andreas type earthquake in Blackpool. Absolute rubbish. Absolute rubbish. We need to do this, and we need to do it fast, don't we?
Yeah, we might. I'm sitting on the fence a wee bit here with fracking. I mean, I think it can cause its own environmental hazards and issues as well. Again, if it's done, it has to be done properly. In the same way, actually, on the other side of the coin, the renewable energies, such as wind power, solar power, again, it has to be done properly, rather than causing an environmental disaster on the other side. In the same way, we get, again, a certain type of individual who'll bray about their electric car, but conveniently forgetting that that electric car has a lithium-ion battery with cobalt extract in it that are quite often plundered from the mines of Congo by child slaves, in the same time destroying that environmental landscape as well. So yes, for environmental sustainability, but it has to be joined up. And again, it has to avoid being hypocritical.
Yeah, I mean, in the long term, and in fairness, there are kind of plans for this. What we need is quite a few more nuclear power stations, but they take between 10 and 15 years to build, so they are not an immediate solution. So the other thing to bear in mind is, of course, renewables. You know, wind turbines and solar panels are a lovely green idea, but they will never ever supply enough energy to keep this country going. So we need alternative power sources, and surely fracking is the most obvious and speedy solution to what is going to become a massive crisis fairly soon.
Yeah, it is a solution in terms of providing energy supply. I get that. And it also provides, as you said, in terms of employment and, again, community opportunities in terms of providing industry as well. But there is an environmental hazard attached to that. This is. So I think what has to happen with all aspects of energy is, again, some form of national conversation where the government is transparent, always doing literally a cost-benefit analysis of all aspects of energy supply. Which ones work, which ones provide jobs, which ones will actually sustain in terms of supply that we need, but also which ones do actually have an environmental hazard attached to that. I mean, if you look at even, for instance, the argument about oil and gas, I mean, Nicola Sturgeon, part of our model for Scottish independence, and I say this as someone who's, I suppose, sympathetic to independence, part of their economic model was about the revenues from oil in particular. Yet she quite recently effectively put a line through the new oil fields in the North Sea. So at the moment, we're having, again, inconsistencies from our government about, first of all, we have to make sure people are, or two things, getting the energy supply, but secondly, they're not paying through the roof for it. The other aspect attached to that is providing jobs and investment for communities. But the other aspect that has to be factored in is which environmental supplies of energy work, which ones will actually save the planet rather than destroy the planet. At the moment, it's jumbled up thinking, and we have governments who seem to be flipping around from one thing to the other, and there's nothing sustainable about the strategy within our energy policy whatsoever.
But if you told millions of people around the country right now that if we frack and we extract the vast reserves of shale gas that's underneath this country right now, it would bring your energy bills, it would literally bring them down by 75%, and it will keep them cheap for the next 100 years, but there might be some slight environmental problems. Guess what they're going to say? Never mind the environmental problems, I can't afford these current bills. So we've got to face reality. We cannot have a perfect world where there aren't some environmental problems concerned with, you know, in terms of energy supplies. We've got to get cheap energy to the people, and I think we've got to do it soon.
We do. I mean, the fundamental, I think, the premise of any successful government has to take care of its people. And that fundamentally comes down to economic circumstances. If you're having a lack of opportunities in certain communities, as I touched on earlier, combined with people feeling it in their own pockets where they've got a choice between, you know, putting food on the table or filling up their car, people are going to find that unacceptable. It's a failure of government. There's no point swanking around the world at various conferences and summits to provide so-called targets in 30 years' time if they're not actually looking after their own on a day-to-day basis in terms of standard of living or job opportunities, or the fact there's increased poverty, or we've now got an energy crisis that is largely linked to cost. People are sick of this. People are feeling forgotten about and marginalised. And it's very easy for individuals from a financial background or certain economic circumstances to say, we're going to do X, Y, and Z in terms of agendas and have loads of expensive summits to talk about it, but conveniently forgetting about the people they're supposed to serve. And people are at home worrying about, right, I've got a choice here between this £100 this week. What do I do with it? Do I pay my electricity bill? Do I put fuel in the car? Or do I feed my kids? That is the real world. And we have politicians who are so far removed from that. It's unbelievable.
I agree. Hold those